Okay. Let me march through these quotes a little bit here. In the first two paragraphs, he's put on stage this notion of a pure theory of empirically meaningful languages. And we'll see him later on saying that you can identify philosophy with the pure pragmatics of empirically meaningful languages. In this period around 1950, that's his characterization of them. And I should mention that in the handout, the very last thing on it is some text, mostly from footnotes, from an early draft of the Realism and the New Way of Words paper that's in the archive there. It's sort of a remarkably different essay than the one that we have, and in some sense much easier to understand. It sort of got worse as he put more stuff into it. But in these footnotes that don't make it into the final version, he says actually the idea of pragmatic metalanguages is a confusion. You can do everything in an object language and a semantic metalanguage. And he clearly changed his mind about that in a period of about a year and thought, no, this is the way to go forward. It's a striking thing that after about 1954, we never hear about pragmatic metalanguages from him again. He stops talking that way. Though I think the ideas keep going, and I want to claim that some of the problems he has in formulating his views in the late 50s and early 60s could be resolved if he wheeled in the notion of pragmatic metalanguages again. That's exactly what he needs to do what he's trying to do. So at any rate, I just gave you the text. It's extremely obscure, but since I had run across it, put it there. Okay, in section 3 here, we get a target, a little bit of ideology. He says we could be, with the semantic turn in logical empiricism, I should say just terminologically, Feigl wrote an immensely influential essay in the late 20s calling what the Vienna Circle was doing logical positivism. And this was a bad idea, and he was almost immediately sorry about it. He said he'd go to international meetings, and French people would yell at him about this. Positivistes, ce sont des idiots! And he realized he didn't really know anything about Auguste Comte, and had just sort of said this, and was tarring the logical empiricists with this brush, and started calling them logical empiricists instead. But the other essay had been so influential that they never were really able to get people to stop calling them positivists. In the late 60s, the University of Pittsburgh was characterized, philosophy department was characterized as the Vatican of positivism. And they want to say, well, yes, but logical empiricism, it's not positivism. Yeah, okay. So, in the syntactic phase, at the time of the logical syntax of language, meaning was not an acceptable concept for Carnap. With the semantic change, Tarski persuaded him, okay, we can think about it. But Sellars here introduces in 3 one of his enemies. We can sort of see that just as the syntactic, restricting ourselves to syntactic, rules, couldn't do everything. So even the move to semantic rules can't. What it really leaves out is the use of the language, which is what he wants to bring in here. So we can see something's missing, but he says the danger is that it won't be suitable philosophical concepts we bring in. It'll be empirical concepts. Finding expression along empirical psychological lines, there's occurring a psychologistic infection. Again, this language, he's defecting to the enemy camp. There's an infection of this, of these semantic categories themselves. The result is a blurring of the sharp distinction between philosophical and factual propositions, which was the primary value of the syntactical phase of logical empiricism. Yeah.
Just a clarificatory question, because I think I have a fine grasp on what the syntactic phase kind of was and what syntactic rules are, but what's an example of a semantic rule that is not, as Sellars sees it, adequate and requires the move to the pragmatics?
So in terms of logical syntax of language, you've got formation rules and transformation rules, and the transformation rules are of two kinds, the L rules and the P rules, but the P rules aren't really part of the language. And Sellars thinks that without the P rules, you can't actually characterize the meanings of expressions. And so he's going to want to add to the language his conformation rules, so there'd be formation, transformation, and conformation rules, which specify material inferential relations among the empirical predicates. And he thinks that the syntactic one can't do that, and even talking about conditions of truth doesn't give you the expressive resources to formulate these confirmation rules. But the worry is that it'll just be habits that you get in there and not rules. The rulishness won't be in there. That's so. I mean, his targets in here are four phrases that he uses for them. Psychologism, that he's introducing here. Factualism, which I think is a genus of which psychologism is a species. That is, psychologism is factualism about sort of the mental or the psychological or whatever. The ontological fallacy, that comes up mostly toward the end, and naive realism. Those are the four things that he is setting his face against. Those are the mistakes that we're to avoid. He tells us something about psychologism here. The other expressions he just uses without defining them or explaining them. We're supposed to know what those are. And in particular, naive realism and the ontological fallacy, that's part of the idiom of critical realism complaining about new realism. That's thinking that all there is to the meaning of concepts is the object in the world that they refer to. And you're to read your semantics off of the ontology. That's, as I understand it, the ontological fallacy, and that's naive realism in semantics as well. The thought that when you know what you're talking about, you've settled everything you need to know about the semantic content. I mean, before we look down our noses at his target here, remember theories of direct reference, not of all expressions, but of some expressions, are abroad in the land that say that at least for most uses of demonstratives, some uses of indexicals, and some uses of proper names, maybe natural kind terms, all there is to the semantic content is the object picked out. Those direct referential theories are abroad. They're not universal, but if those are instances of naive realism and what he's calling the ontological fallacy. So if there's some sweeping argument against that, at some point we want to go back and consult our conscience about these direct referential semantic theories. Okay. Blurring the sharp distinction between philosophical and factual propositions, which it was the primary value of the syntactical phase of logical empiricism to enforce. Well, this is, I want to say that among the things that he saw in Carnap that let the scales fall from his eyes, and he said, yes, this is a progressive movement, this we can go forward with, was what, if we help ourselves to some of the language from one of the index quotes last time, was already in the syntactic phase an ungrudging recognition that some expressions did not have a ground-level descriptive empirical job, but we're not second-class citizens either. We're not to be thought of the way Carnap thought of normative expressions, well, anyway, moral expressions in an affective expressivist way, as not really sort of making claims, because they were metalinguistic. Metalinguistic things were okay, even though they were not empirical descriptive vocabulary. And philosophy consisted of these metalinguistic expressions. That's the logical syntax of language view. And Sellars is saying, well, and that was really a really good idea, that there are some concepts that are not playing a descriptive explanatory or explanatory empirical job. They're talking about doing that job. They're metalinguistic. And Sellars is going to have the idea that Carnap never had, that those are that's a successor notion to Kantian categories. That what they're onto and the reason the new way of words is the way forward is that that's this new category of metalinguistic expressions that Tarski invented and Carnap adopted is a respectable, potentially precise category, categorial notion, way of thinking about things playing a categorical function. So he's saying this is crucial to the conceptual advance that we're making, that you see that there's a sharp difference in, I'm putting words in his mouth, the expressive role played by empirical descriptive vocabulary and philosophical vocabulary, which includes epistemology. That's the category here. That, by the way, was the topic of critical realism and new realism. It was putting epistemology front and center in philosophy. So the proper supplementation, he goes on, to overcome the infection, has to serve two functions. You have to be able to do philosophy in it. Well, the stronger claim here, all genuinely philosophical questions have to be able to given an adequate formulation in these metalinguistic terms. That's what he's seeing. One of the tasks that he's seeing himself and the Carnap of logical syntax of languages engaged in. Once we got these new respectable but not empirical concepts to do philosophy in, namely the metalinguistic ones, we've got to show how to do everything that's really philosophically important in those concepts. And that goes well beyond what Carnap was trying to do in language, in the logical syntax of language, or at least insofar as Carnap thought he was doing everything that could be done philosophically, or at least formulating all the concepts and issues there, it was because he had a Procrustean shrunk notion of philosophical questions compared to Sellars' notion of it. So, some supplementation is needed, but it must lead to a clarification of the distinction between philosophical and empirical concepts. And if you go psychologistic, you're not going to get that. Now we get, in these next couple of sections, 4 and 5, an absolutely fascinating brief discussion of rationalism and empiricism and Platonism. It's wildly out of place in the essay, as far as I can see it. At any rate, he's not doing himself any favors in advancing the argument of the essay, but he can't resist telling us these things, and they are worthwhile. He's saying, look, there's something that empiricism didn't see. Basically, they didn't see that without playing a role in norm-governed reasoning, there isn't any content. He doesn't say that, but that's what he's referring to. That's what the rationalists saw, that playing a role in reasoning is absolutely essential, and a proper rationalist, a Kantian rationalist, sees that that role is a normative role, a role articulated by reasons. But the empiricists didn't see that at all, so they just saw sort of matter-of-factual relations, regularities, and habits of ideas. That was as far as they got. So they didn't get as far as really contentful things. He says later in the essay, as a result, some of the classic British empiricists barely deserve to be called philosophers at all, because they're doing this sort of armchair psychology instead. He would be absolutely horrified at the people who read Kant as a cognitive psychologist, including, I blush to say, some of his former students who do that. At any rate, he has here the very interesting thought that the trouble with traditional rationalism was that they were factualists too. They also didn't understand role in reasoning in normative terms. That would have to wait for Kant. And here he has in mind, I think, though he mentions Leibniz and not Spinoza in the later discussion of it, Spinoza has this fabulous insight into what Descartes was doing. Yeah, okay. I'm going to tell you a 2-minute story. So, here's Descartes' big idea, or anyway, the one of the three of them that I'll talk about. The pre-Cartesian tradition thought of the relation between appearance and reality, mind and world, in terms of categories of resemblance, modeled on picturing. That when things went well, what was going on in the mind resembled what was going on out in the world in the sense of sharing properties with it, in the way that the picture of George Washington on the $1 bill is a picture of him. It resembles him insofar as there are shape properties and ratio properties that it literally shares with him. And you could think about this in terms of sharing Platonic forms or sharing Aristotelian forms, but it was in terms of resemblance. But the new science made that impossible. Copernicus says the reality behind the appearance of a stationary Earth and a sun describing an arc over us is a stationary sun and a spinning earth. There's no resemblance there. Galileo, seeing the book of nature written in the language of geometry, says the very best appearance of the reality of a period of time is the length of a line. And the very best appearance, the one that makes most intelligible, makes you best understand what's going on, of the acceleration of a falling body is the area of a triangle. There just isn't any resemblance at that point. Descartes comes along and says, well, right, what you need is a more abstract notion than resemblance. You need a notion of representation, which is not a matter of a representing, sharing properties with what's represented. Descartes' own view is that this representational relation is sui generis and ontological. There's some things in the world that by nature, by the kind of substance they are as if of things, tanquam rem, are representings by nature, and everything else is only fit to be represented by nature. And didn't give us an explicit account of what it is to be a representing. But Spinoza saw what Descartes should have said. He saw what the idea was, on the basis of which Descartes had come up with this much more abstract notion of representation, which would then be at the center of early modern philosophy and, in some sense, down to us today. And that was that the model was Descartes' algebraic geometry, that the paradigm of a representation for Descartes was a discursive representation, an equation, x squared plus y squared equals 1, which represents a circle. No resemblance between, or sharing of properties between the equation and the circle, but the one is the best representation of the other. Think of the mind as having the equations in it, and the world being Descartes, being Galileo's world of extended things. And then we have another representation, x plus y equals 1. That's the representation of a line, and it turns out that the fact that those two equations have two solutions is the same fact as, or is a representation of the fact that that line cuts that circle at exactly two places. But there is no resemblance here. This was sort of Descartes' model for all of this. But what Spinoza saw that Descartes didn't is how that works. That it's a global isomorphism between the equations and the geometry that makes it work. There is a resemblance, but it's not a point-by-point resemblance. It's a resemblance only holistically at the level of the whole structure. That things you can do to the equations, like solve them simultaneously, correspond systematically to things you can do with the figures, count their intersections. He saw this holistic lesson and epitomized this in the slogan, the order and connection of things is the same as the order and connection of ideas. And the emphasis is on the order and connection of them. That's what's the same thing. And that's what makes one thing a representation of something else. That was implicit in Descartes, but he never drew that conclusion. Spinoza did. And that's when rationalism really kicks off. What Sellars is pointing to in these two paragraphs is that the thought Spinoza did not have is that there's a fundamental difference between the order and connection of things and the order and connection of ideas. And that is that the order and connection of ideas is normative. That being committed to one of these things commits you to the other, it entitles you to the other things. There's a difference between matter-of-factual or causal order and connection of things and the normative rational one. That idea would wait for Kant, and putting the holism together with the normativity, that would wait for Hegel. Now, Sellars has, I want to claim, all of this in mind in these two paragraphs. Maybe he wouldn't have filled it in just the way I've filled it in, but when he says the rationalists had the right idea, this functionalist idea that it's the role in the order and connection of ideas that is the contentfulness of the idea, but they were factualists about it. I thought, well, here's, we can describe the order of connection of ideas, we can describe the order and connection of things, and look, there will be an isomorphism between those descriptions. And in that, they fell down. So we need to supplement empiricism with rationalism, but then we need to not make the factualist mistake that even the rationalists made. Why he thought it helped his story to try and say this in these telegraphic terms at the beginning of his essay, I mean, it's intelligible. Here's what I'm trying to do, guys. I'm saying what we need to do is add to logical empiricism what the rationalists added to British empiricism, traditional empiricism, and then add the rulishness that Kant added to it. That's what I'm trying to do. A little hard to process in the terms he's having it here. But so empiricism too has its factualist. All right. The essential task is to rob rationalism of the illusion that it is making factual statements, because expressing a rule is doing something different than stating a fact. That's the key insight, which he thinks Carnap has got. Okay. But of course, empiricism isn't all right either. It's got a factualist illusion too. An empiricism which recognizes that empiricism is not an empirical thesis will be identical with a rationalism which recognizes that rationalism is not a factual thesis. So there's a ringing slogan, and I hope I've given some indication of what he's after with this. I mean, it's early days for him. He doesn't have a clear view of these, but this is, what he's aiming at. Okay, so he starts to get more specific here in 6, a pure theory of empirically meaningful languages. He's going to have things like verified, confirmed, meaningful in it. And he throws in, because these are going to be part of his story, type, token, and world story. Okay, I mentioned on page 5 you get this footnote, which is again saying where he's going. We must recognize a use of meaning which is distinct from that of empirical psychology. This is the sense that's relevant to the semantic analysis of epistemological predicates. And now he gives us, just in this footnote, his characterization and criticism of Platonism. Which brings in his nominalism. You mustn't think of universals as in the same way that we'll worry about this when we worry about nominalism here. But he has very useful things to say about Platonism. And actually, in the same year, 49, he writes an essay on Aristotelian philosophies of mind, which he never reprinted, and as a result, nobody's ever read, basically, which is just a gem-like account of what's right and what's wrong with Aristotelian philosophies of mind, how he thinks about form and matter in it. You can get to it through the bibliography of Sellars' things. Everything that they could put in HTML they did, and you can click on those and get this Aristotelian philosophies of mind from 1949. Okay, so look, I think it's time to talk about the details of his view here, which you get sort of data points for in these quotes, but it gets set out fairly compactly. Yeah. So to see where he's going, in 20, so bottom of page 8, a calculus, so I'm not pretending we know what any of this means yet. This is just what I'm going to quickly try to explain. A calculus with specified confirmation rules which permits the formulation of expressions which conform to the defining requirements of a confirmed world story will be called an empirical language form. And that's what philosophy is the pure pragmatics of, is these things. So he's going to be practicing the pure pragmatics. An empirical language form pinned down to one of these world stories, and hence for which the formal status and hence meanings of its individual constants is fixed, will be called an empirical or empirically meaningful language, not just the language form. Here, the thing to notice is that the world story is what gives meaning to the individual constants. The language form is going to express the meaning, articulate the meaning of the predicates in it. And this is feeding into what will be his nominalism on down the line. The world story which fixes the individual constants will be called the meaning base of the language. The individual constants and primitive predicates of the language will be said to be meaningful expressions of the language, as will atomic sentences constructed of them. The designata of meaningful individual constants and predicates will be said to exist in the world of the language. A meaningful sentence which belongs to the story, which is the meaning base of the language, will be said to be confirmed in S and be a confirmed sentence. A meaningful sentence of L which belongs to a verification base of L will be called a verified sentence of L. A predicate which appears in at least one verified sentence of L will be called a datum predicate of L. And a meaningful predicate of L which appears only in confirmed sentences of L will be called a non-datum predicate of L. Okay, so this is summing up the sort of story that he's telling. Let me try and say what he's talking about and what some of these things mean. So his idea is that what's missing from even the semantic version of logical empiricism is the idea that it's the fact that a language is used in a world that makes intelligible that the language is about that world. And that what needs to be articulated by a pure pragmatics is the relation between using the language in a world and using the language to talk about the world. That is, using the language in such a way that some designation statements that tell you what it is in the world that a sentence, that an expression is about, mean. How do those designation sentences, which are semantic sentences, they're sentences like the expression red designates redness, or red, statements like come true, and we have to understand how they become true by using the language in a world. That's what the pure pragmatics is supposed to do. And that's what semantics by itself doesn't do. So semantics articulates rules for using expressions like designates. And for instance, the triumph of Tarskian semantics, then philosophically elaborated by Carnap, is to say a great deal, really, about what the relationship is between designation statements and truth statements. How do you derive characterizations of some sentences as true from sentences that express what subsentential expressions designate, the individual constants and predicates. That's what the semantic turn in logical empiricism told us a lot about. But what it doesn't tell us anything about is what designates means, or how it comes to mean that. Give us some semantically relevant whatsits associated with expressions as their semantic interpretants, as what's designated by them, and formal gives us machinery that will grind out more semantic sentences, more associations of semantically relevant whatsits with complex expressions that depend in a systematic way on the association of semantically relevant whatsits with simpler expressions. That's what it does. But what it doesn't do is explain what it is for something to have a semantically relevant whatsits associated with it, or how that happens. Those are all taken for granted in the semantics. These days, I think we would distinguish between formal semantics and philosophical semantics. So formal semantics associate semantic interpretants with some expressions and show how systematically to derive associations of related semantic interpretants with complex expressions made up or some way related to the basic expressions. That's formal semantics. But the philosophical semantics is asking, well, what do you mean when you say the semantic interpretant of this expression is this thing? And how does that association get made? In doing Tarskian model theory, well, we just stipulate it in a more expressively powerful metalanguage. We just say the designatum of this individual constant is this domain element in this relational structure. But that's not the way it works in empirical languages. God is not stipulating in a more powerful metalanguage how these things are viewed. How does it happen? That's the philosophical question, Sellars is saying, and we need to look at the use of language to see how that works. So so that's his enterprise, is to say something about that, to begin to give us a vocabulary for that. So he's going to use the notion of a meta-language that he takes over from Tarski and Carnap. And he's going to use the distinction between types and tokens. We get this early on. And here he uses it in a non-standard way. He uses this distinction in a non-standard way. And he sort of marks that, but he doesn't, to my mind, make enough of it because it's the way he's using it differently than it's normally used. If you don't see that, you exactly miss the point that he's using it to make. And it might have been better to use other expressions. So the distinction between types and tokens, this is due to Peirce. And sort of the home language game of it is, if I write on the board an E followed by an A followed by an E, and ask how many letters did I write on the board, you can see you could give two different answers to that question. There's 3 tokens and 2 types. The types are E and A, and the tokens are that one, and that one. That's the ordinary distinction. Now, philosophers use that all over the place these days, and many of those applications are not philosophically innocent. For instance, it's a fundamental point of McDowellian philosophy that it's a philosophical howler to use the type-token distinction to apply to intentional states, to think speak as philosophers are wont to do, that if you believe that the Cathedral of Learning is 555 feet high, and I believe that the Cathedral of Learning is 555 feet high, that I have a token belief and you have a token belief and they're of the same type. And McDowell said, you've already made such a fundamental philosophical mistake if you talk that way, that he's going to have to back you up 6 moves in order to tell you how you ought to be talking. Well, I mean, you can sort of see what it is. The home language game of this is languages and instances of the language, and intentional states are not like that. They're a different kind of thing, and there aren't tokens of them. There can be instances of them, but not all instances are tokens. This will actually come up in talking about the functionalism later on, so I'll just register that this is a landmine as far as McDowell is concerned that you could easily step on without realizing that you were doing that. Okay. Sellars introduces the type-token distinction and immediately says it would be absolutely disastrous to identify a type with a class of tokens, even the class of all possible tokens. That'd be a disastrous mistake. Well, not if you use it in the ordinary way. That's sort of okay. You think of the type as determining also all the possible tokens of it. It's because types are norms. They're the rules that govern the use of the tokens, the way he's using the expression. And so, as he says somewhere, he says, there's 3 things. There's the type, there's the class of the tokens, and there's tokens. And the class, the extension that the token falls in that class, don't identify that with the type. The type is part of the form in a formal language, by which he means a normative language, a language of rules, a language of the kind that Carnap was talking about already in that 1924-26 piece that we read. Okay, that's just to mention that piece of it. Second move that he makes is to say the meaning of the one-place predicates in the language, the monadic predicates in the language, has to be understood in terms of conformation rules that relate them one to another. And these are the ones that let us pass inferentially from one to another. And he says, and those conformation rules get expressed in the form of multiplace relational predicates. But we have to distinguish between the application of a multiplace predicate and the rule that's expressed, the rule about permitting us to pass inferentially from an antecedent to a consequent that is captured in this relational predicate. So the relational predicate says, well, if something's an A, then it's a B. If it's copper, then it'll melt at 1,084 degrees see. That's a confirmation rule. And he's saying that articulates the content of copper and temperature, though there's this whole web of that. And that much we could express at the level of a language. But you can't articulate the meaning of the individual constants that way. The only way to understand the use of the individual constants is to understand them in relation to a world story, a story you've told in this language, a set of sentences that you've endorsed. And he tells us the myth of Jones, not the famous myth of famous Jones in the second half of Empiricism and the Philosophy of Mind. This is the myth of omniscient Jones, who does nothing but go around saying, that's red, that's a circle. Only he does it really fast and about everything. Later on, Sellars will talk about robots that say, this here now red, this here now circular, and so on. But his claim is, in order to think about an empirical language, getting to be about a world, you have to think of it as used in a world, and doing that is thinking about this ideal of omniscient Jones and the world story he would tell, where everything is said. And he says, well, now this world story, which actually applies the predicates to things in the world it's used in, that's the key point. Now, he's still thinking of individual constants. He doesn't even talk about singular terms here. What he's saying is true, more or less, of indexical and demonstrative uses. What Reichenbach, another occasional drop-in at the Vienna Circle, would call token reflexive expressions. That is, expressions where each token of them means something different. That's wood, that's paper. The two that's mean different things, even though they're of the same Persian type. It's token reflexive expressions that he means. He could have helped himself here, I think, by talking about tokenings rather than tokens. This is a subtler distinction than is often made, but it does matter if you're going to think about demonstratives and indexicals. My favorite example is a guy I saw once in New York wearing a sort of monk's outfit and with a sign with an arrow on it that said, "You are a sinner." And he pointed at people as they went by. Now, he only had the one token of this "you are a sinner" with the arrow, but every time he tokened it, every time he pointed it at you, it meant somebody different. And if you're going to think about these things, individuating by tokens isn't quite good enough. It has to be the tokenings, the unrepeatable events. And that's what Sellars means by individual constants here. That's what he's talking about, is tokenings. But he doesn't sort that out. He is not thinking about that making a difference, or he just wants to continue to use the language of individual constants that Carnap used. It makes it sort of hard to understand what's going on. That the other distinction that he puts in play here is the distinction between verification and confirmation with an I. And this is the distinction between observational vocabulary and claims that only have non-observational uses, what he'll later call theoretical vocabulary. And he has a story about the verification claims that they are the link between the world in the story and the world story is made by a designation statement, like that is red, and that happens when, now that designation statement is a statement in the language, but it's true when the designatum of the right side is a token of the type, of the same type as is on the left side of the designation statement, and when the designatum on the right, the designatum of the expression on the right, is co-experienced with the token on the left side of the designation. So when I'm saying that's red, and there's something I'm experiencing that's red, that's what establishes the connection. This is notable only, I think, in that it's all done within the language story, within the world story. There's this co-experience predicate, and he's saying, well, that's sort of the truth condition, that's what's making the empirical connection. This is mixing Aufbau with logical syntax of language. And then he's saying the confirmed stuff is the stuff you can get to inferentially by transformation and conformation rules from the stuff that's verified. So this is extremely sketchy. He knows it's extremely sketchy, but he's trying to say something about what doing philosophy as the pure pragmatics of empirical languages would look like. So I think that he actually does this better in the pure pragmatics and epistemology essay. That's the one we'll focus on next time. The other thing we'll read, and I think it's a treasure, never published, is this fragment from 1950, maybe 20 pages long, outline of a philosophy of language that he presented in La Jolla and never finished. It's done in Tractarian numbering, and he only got to proposition 2 in it, though there are many sort of articulations of the other. Well, there should be 7 if it's real Tractarian. If he's really going to do the Tractatus, even though the last one can be short, there should be 7 of them. Anyway, I think it's a treasure, and there's an image of it in the course website there. So I hope that I've given you the conceptual tools to read that with different eyes, and maybe look back at this one, or at least these index passages here, with different eyes. Okay, well, then I'll see you next week.